Hello, happy dwellers, and welcome to the Happy Dwelling Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here with me today, and I hope you have been well and are creating those great habits so your dwelling place can be a happy one. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to the Happy Dwelling Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you as always, and I hope that you are looking forward to today's topic just as much as I am because, man, we are speaking some truth today, and I'm very excited about it, actually. Before we get into it, I'm going to do what we always do, which is our Gratefulness Corner. And because we don't have a guest on today, it's only me, I will share with you today what it is that I'm grateful for. As I share this, I hope that you also think about something that you're grateful for as well. It's all about community. It's all about us elevating our lives and having a more happy dwelling place, hence the name. Okay, today I am grateful for the ability to make up my mind. By this I mean I get to decide every day when I wake up what type of day I'm going to have, how I'm going to respond to things, and how I choose to look at the glass. Is it half full or half empty? I recently found myself in a negative rut. Once I realized that I was in a negative rut, I decided to change my mind. And I'm very happy that I have the ability to do that. And you also have the ability to do that. So I hope that if you find yourself in a negative spiral, that you are able to change your mind, decide that today's going to be a good day. And you're going to be positive. And we're going to find the good things within this day. We're going to expound on them. Whatever is bad, we're going to change it because we have that ability. I think you get the gist. Today's topic is something that is heavy. It's heavy because everybody in America, and I can't speak on the rest of the world, either has had breast cancer, knows of somebody who has had breast cancer, has experienced somebody close to them dying that has breast cancer. And so because of this topic is so sensitive, I wanted to bring it to the forefront because I'm a big advocate for prevention as much as we possibly can. And I think October, because it is the month of National Breast Cancer Prevention Month, I don't hear a lot of these topics being talked about when we talk about prevention. I hear a lot of get screened. I hear a lot of get screened so that you can catch it and then get treated with chemotherapy or radiation therapy or whatever the other therapy oncologists want you to be treated with. I don't hear a lot of people talking about, hey, on the prevention side, what are some other things that we can do to limit our chance of getting it? Because let's be honest, life is life and it be lifing sometimes. And sometimes no matter what you do to prevent, you still end up with a sickness or a disease. And there's some unexplainable things that happen in life. And sometimes it's not linked to your diet and lifestyle. Sometimes it's linked to stress. Sometimes it's linked to your emotions. There's so many variables here. But I think this conversation needs to be had, and it needs to be had more frequently and not just in October. And from the prevention side, I wanted to bring to light some things that you might not have heard. And so share this episode out with somebody that you love. Share it with somebody who you know is possibly at risk of having breast cancer because their sister or their mom or their family member has gotten it. Because I can guarantee you that you know somebody that meets those requirements. So with that being said, let's get into it. What are some statistics on breast cancer in America? So according to the CDC in the United States, every year, about 240,000 cases of breast cancer are diagnosed in women, and about 2,100 in men, because men can get it too. And about 42,000 women and 500 men in the U.S. die each year from breast cancer. It's a pretty high amount. It's a high number. Black women have a higher rate of death from breast cancer than all other women. Now here's another stat. And this is from cancer.org. Overall, the average risk of a woman in the United States developing breast cancer sometime in her life is about 13%. That means there's a 1 in 8 chance that she will develop breast cancer. That's a high stat as well. So 1 out of 8 women will develop breast cancer at some point in their lives. That's something to swallow. And that's why we're having this conversation here today, because that's a high risk. So in order to have this conversation, we also need to know what cancer is. In simple terms, cancer is uncontrolled cell growth. Okay? A normal cell grows, divides, differentiates, so they change into whatever cell that they need to. They carry out the purpose that they were meant to. So for an example, a white blood cell, it starts off as like a little baby white blood cell. I'm just putting this in very simple terms. And depending on what its fate is going to be, if it's going to be a neutrophil, if it's going to be a T cell, whatever cell it is going to be, it then differentiates into it. It goes through some type of process where it becomes what it's supposed to be. And then it does what it's supposed to do. It lives out its purpose designed to help the organism at large. Now, our normal cells have this ability to kill off cells that do not follow the instructions. It's called apoptosis. And this is a normal part of the cell life. Sometimes even a cell will get old, and so it has to die. It's not carrying out the functions like it's supposed to, so it has to die. It has just met its requirements, and so it's time for somebody else to replace it, and so it dies. This is a normal process that our cells go through. Now, when it comes to cancer cells, they do not follow these instructions. They do what they want to do, okay? They hijack certain parts of the body so they can be fed and thrive, and they usually divide quickly. Right? So I mentioned before, cells have this cell cycle where they have to go through different phases until they get to the point of division. Cancer cells do not follow that. They get the nutrients and the resources they need so that they can divide, and they usually divide rapidly. They have this ability called angiogenesis to hijack blood vessels so that they can create their own pathway so that they can be fed, right? So once again, to survive and thrive and divide. Now, we all have potential to have cancer cells because cancer cells usually arise from DNA damage, and DNA damage can come from a lot of things, and we'll briefly talk about that during this episode. Tori from the future here. Most cancer cells come from DNA mutations, not necessarily DNA damage. There's a difference there, but back to the episode. That's where most cancer cells come from. And then you also have cancer cells that it might not be necessarily from DNA damage, but they don't follow the orders when it comes to the division process. Some risk factors involved in cancer. Number 1, age. There's a reason why there's a big push for women aged 40 and up to be screened for breast cancer. And that's because the older you are, the higher chance that you get it. Another risk factor is early menarche. That means the onset of your first period. So the earlier you get your period, there's a higher chance you have of getting breast cancer. And if you look at what's going on in the United States today, women, girls are getting their periods early and earlier. This is due to many different things, but that's not what this episode is about. So we're going to just leave it as that. Another thing, late menopause, when your cycle ends. Some people go through it later than others, but when it happens later, you're at an increased risk of breast cancer. Another risk factor, late age of first pregnancy. And you don't really hear this being talked about in society because obviously we don't want a lot of young women getting pregnant and giving birth if they are not financially, emotionally, whatever, ready to have a baby. So this is not something that is commonly talked about, but research shows that the later you are in terms of having your first pregnancy is a higher risk that you are to have breast cancer. And then here's another one. A low number of kids. Another thing we don't talk about, because we always talk about population control. We don't want women to just get out here and pop out all these babies. But the less number of kids you have is the higher risk that you have to have breast cancer. Now we're going to get into the 5 things that you can do to lower your chance of getting breast cancer. Number 1, lower your carcinogen intake. Okay, so what is a carcinogen? A carcinogen is a substance, organism, or agent capable of causing cancer. Carcinogens can occur naturally in the environment, or they can be generated by humans, like from automobile exhaust and cigarette smoke. Most carcinogens work to create cancer by interacting with the cell's DNA to produce mutation. So we talked about DNA damage earlier. So this is one of the ways that you can do it. So there's a bunch of carcinogens out there, and I'm not going to really talk about all of them because it's too many, but some that I do want to briefly touch on is number 1, tobacco, which I think everybody has a general understanding of cigarette smoking not being good for you. Tobacco is also found in vaping products. So I know that that's a huge fad nowadays with Gen Z and even older generations. And hookah. Hookah is another one that's like common and normalized, but there's a whole bunch of tobacco in it. As a matter of fact, there's more tobacco in hookah than there is in a cigarette, but it's cooler. So be mindful of your tobacco exposure, whether that be secondary, primary, you're doing it yourself, you're living in a household of somebody that does smoke, or tertiary, it's on somebody's clothes and you're like up close to them, hugging them, sleeping in their sheets, etc. All of those are sources of tobacco that you can inhale and expose yourself to a carcinogen. Number 2, heavy metals. This is something that is found in our food sources. You hear a lot of recalls on foods because of heavy metal exposure, or sometimes you don't, because the food system in America doesn't really do that great of a job of protecting us from things like this. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. This is one of those things where you can do your best to be educated on and prevent yourself from being exposed to it, but ultimately you're probably going to be exposed to it. Burned foods. So when you burn foods, you have something called acrylamide that is produced that is a known carcinogen. So when you are charring your meats, or you're cooking something in the oven and it's getting that burnt crispiness on it, I know a lot of us might enjoy that, but that is actually a carcinogen. So it's best if you cook your foods to the point that they are brown but not burnt, because we don't want to expose ourselves to carcinogens that we don't have to. Another example of this is processed meats. Processed meats have known carcinogens, nitrates, etc. So I'm talking about your bacon. I'm talking about your deli meats. I'm talking about things that are smoked. All of these are examples of processed meats that contain carcinogens that you are exposing yourself to. Okay, so if you want to eat meat, cool. Eat it off the bone. Eat it in a way that's not going to cause damage or expose you to carcinogens. So really, like bacon, sausage, all the things that we're commonly exposed to, especially for breakfast, when it comes to meats, stay clear of that. Once again, your deli meats, stay clear of that. There are ways that people can cook it so that they aren't creating nitrates in it. You can find it on the label. A lot of times it'll say nitrate free. If you want to eat that, that's cool too. Carcinogens can be found in a lot of other places as well, and I guess we'll touch on it more when we dive into some of the other things that you can do to limit your exposure or reduce your risk of cancer. Number 2, lower estrogenic compounds. There was a study in the International Journal of Cancer that found that in mice, not just estrogen binding to the receptor, but estradiol compounds in the blood increased breast cancer. What does that mean? They find that estrogen in excess can increase your risk of cancer. So I have this here to lower estrogenic compounds, because when you lower that, you can lower your risk of getting cancer. So the study that I mentioned just now, in a lot of previous research, they found that it was the estrogen that bound to receptors, so things on the cell that helps it take up the estrogen and then do something with it. But this study found that not only that, but just having estrogen or another form of estrogen would be estradiol floating around in your bloodstream can increase your risk of breast cancer. Okay, Tori, that's wonderful. Thank you for telling me that. But what does that mean to me and in my life, and how can I reduce my risk? So they found that a lot of different things can increase your risk of estrogen. Number one, hormone replacement therapy. This is something that is commonly used around the time of menopause or perimenopause, around the time of menopause. That's what that means. And it's supposed to help reduce the symptoms of menopause. Sometimes it is very necessary. But something that you have to keep in mind is estrogen is a hormone. Anytime you mess with your hormones outside of the context that it's meant to be in, you are changing something within your body that can have other ramifications. It can have other side effects, because your body is doing what it does for a reason and a purpose. And so hormone replacement therapy has been shown to increase the risk of breast cancer. And once you get off the hormone replacement therapy, it does, once again, lowers the risk. But it takes a moment for your body to kind of regulate once you already expose yourself to that. Another way, and this one is going to be a little bit controversial, that you can reduce your risk of exogenous or estrogen that comes from outside of your body, is by not using hormonal birth control. I said it. Y'all, this is something that is not talked about half as much, but needs to be brought to light. Hormonal birth control affects your hormones. And when you affect your own hormones, you affect things in your body that were meant to be a certain way, right? I think it's wonderful that we have birth control. I think it's wonderful that women can decide when and where they have children. But I think it's important to also have the conversation of what are some of the side effects of these hormonal birth controls. And most hormonal birth controls on the market have some form of estrogen within them, which thus increases your risk of having breast cancer. So, when you're having that conversation with your doctor about what are some good birth controls that you would like to take, whether that be you're trying to help with acne or regulate your cycle or just reduce the risk of birth or getting pregnant, it's important to bring this up and have this conversation with them, because there are some non-hormonal birth controls on the market that could work for you. All right? Don't stone me because I mentioned this. I just want you to be open-minded when you come here to this podcast, to think about all of your options and not just what is commonly presented to us, okay? Because if you only have half of the story, that is not correct consent. Okay? We're just trying to paint the whole picture and not just part of it. All right, my next thing is alcohol. There was a study that found by increasing alcohol, especially heavy alcohol users, led to an increase in estrogen in the bloodstream. I don't fully understand how this works, but I do understand that the more alcohol you drink, the more you are exposing yourself to more estrogens, and thus the more you are exposing yourself to an increased risk of breast cancer. If you want to drink alcohol, drink it moderately. Drink it here and there. Try not to make it an everyday thing or even an every week thing, because alcohol just on a whole is just no bueno. It's not very good for you. And I think it's important for us to once again have this conversation in society that you can have fun without alcohol. You can feel light and open up without alcohol. Don't use alcohol as a crutch. It's okay in moderation, but don't make it a normal thing. Don't make it an everyday thing. The next thing that can increase your risk of estrogen in your body And there's a lot, and I'm only touching on a few, but this one is not talked about nearly as much. It's xenoestrogens, which are a form of estrogens that are found in plastic that leak out. Okay, so our society uses plastic just about everywhere. And something that we need to talk about is when we interact plastic with water or plastic with food, what happens? There are, once again, these xenoestrogens found in plastic that leak out into our foods. They leak out into our foods, they leak out into our water. So whenever you can avoid using plastic, whether this be with your storage containers for your foods, how you buy your foods, make sure it's not in plastic or try your best not to get it in plastic. In the water that we drink, plastic bottles, they gotta go. They have to go. There are more than enough other alternatives. You got stainless steel bottles, you got glass bottles. You have water filters that you can put into your stainless steel bottles. Water filters that have glass on the outside, once again, that you can pour into your stainless steel or glass water bottles to avoid having the plastic leak out. These xenoestrogens are even more able to leak out into our food and our water when it's heated. So if you have a water bottle in the car, do not drink that. If it has been heated up by the sun, do not drink that. If you're microwaving your food in plastic, you are literally allowing it to seep out. If you're putting hot soup in a plastic bowl, you're allowing it to leak out. There are little changes that we can make to lower our risk of these xenoestrogens because they're everywhere. And it's not only in BPA, which is a known xenoestrogen. There are so many other chemical compounds found in plastic that do similar things to BPA. Going forward, to reduce our risk of cancer and to reduce our risk of these xenoestrogens, it's important for us to make these simple changes, swap it out, so that we can live an overall healthier life. And honestly, plastic is bad for the environment anyway. And it's so integrated in our lives, but we've got to start making those small steps to ultimately live healthier lives. There's so much more I can say here, but this episode is not about xenoestrogens. So we're going to go on to the other thing. Other things that can increase our estrogen can include stress, obesity, pharmaceutical drugs, and just the overall environment. Going back to those carcinogens, we've got stuff in the air. We've got things in our house that release gases that expose us to carcinogens. Carcinogens are everywhere. And so it's just important to try to mitigate that as much as possible, to lower our risk as much as possible by making these small changes, lowering our stress, trying to make sure that we keep our weight in check, doing things to increase our overall health and wellness. On to our next thing. So we talked about carcinogens, we talked about lowering estrogenic compounds. Now the third thing that you can do to lower your risk of breast cancer is to breastfeed. And this one is so awesome to me because most moms that have babies have the ability to breastfeed. I think the stat is like 98%, something along those lines. And so that means that just about everybody can do it. Breastfeeding can lower your risk of breast cancer by 4.3% for every 12 months of breastfeeding. This is in addition to the 7% decrease in risk observed for each birth. If you breastfeed for 12 months, you lowered your risk by 4.3%. If you did it for 2 years, you lowered it by 8.6%, and so on and so forth. This is something that we can all try to do. I have some podcast episodes on breastfeeding, and so if you're interested in that, I would say go ahead and give that a listen because they're pretty awesome. And I need to go back and listen to them myself because I'm kind of far removed. I'm like 2 years removed from breastfeeding. I don't remember all the details that go along with it. But this is definitely something that we can do. So a study titled Breastfeeding and Reduced Risk of Breast Cancer, a systemic review and meta-analysis hypothesized. So they're assuming that this reduced risk in breastfeeding can come from two different mechanisms, two different causes. One, when you breastfeed, there's a differentiation of breast cells. So remember I talked about earlier, cells have the ability to change and to kind of carry out the purpose designed for them. So when your breast cells realize that they have to breastfeed, there's a change that takes place in them, and that's also known as the differentiation, where they are modified to generate milk. And the second thing that they can do is breastfeeding causes a reduction in the lifetime exposure of estrogens, which is why you see in a lot of breastfeeding mamas, they don't usually get their period right back when they're breastfeeding. Some people say that it's a natural birth control, but don't believe that, because you can easily ovulate and get pregnant even if you haven't had your cycle returned. Another reason is when you breastfeed, you do kind of release carcinogens from the milk, and which isn't a good thing for the baby, but that is a good thing for mama. However, breast milk still is the best food source for the baby, even if they are getting some carcinogens from your breast milk. They're also getting immune system functions and anti-carcinogenic effects. They're coming up there's a lot of research showing new compounds being discovered in breast milk. I just want to say that because I don't want people to think, oh, if I breastfeed my baby, I'm giving my baby carcinogens and they're gonna get cancer. No. Just wanted to put that out there as well. Breastfeeding can also contribute to an exfoliation of breast tissues, which can help in destroying the damaged DNA cells. So once again, a lot of these cancer cells come from carcinogens or other sources where DNA is damaged, and then because it's damaged, it loses all sense of what it's supposed to do and does its own thing. So by breastfeeding, you're getting rid of some of those breast tissues, and all of this contributes to a reduced risk in breast cancer. Another thing that this article found, which I thought was interesting, and I need to look more into this myself, is that your blood levels of insulin are minimized when you express human milk during breastfeeding. Some of the things that are found in breast cancer, which is cells multiplying and dividing and not having the ability to kill themselves off, so anti-apoptosis, is found in breast tissue that has the high concentrations of insulin. So when you're breastfeeding, it lowers that, and so that's another way that it can be lowering the risk of breast cancer there. We talked about carcinogens, we talked about lowering estrogenic compounds, we talked about breastfeeding, and now we're going to get into the more light stuff, and we're kind of getting to the end of our talk here. Number 4, the fourth thing that you can do to lower your chance of breast cancer is to exercise. Our bodies were designed for movement, so this should come as no surprise for anybody. There was a study titled Physical Activity and Breast Cancer Reduction, and it looked at a bunch of different studies, that in 73 studies conducted across the world, that there was a 25% average risk reduction among physically active women compared to the least active women. Okay, so if you have breast cancer in your family, if you're concerned about breast cancer at all, just because of the world that we live in, one of the best things that you can do, let's say you never had a kid, you never breastfed, that's not an option for you, but you can certainly exercise. It lowers your chance by 25%. And so it's time for us to start moving, myself included. I'm doing the things that I can do to increase my movement. And I'll do a whole podcast episode on this, ways to increase movement that don't involve going to the gym, because who really has time to carve out of their day to spend that amount of time in a gym, really? If you're a mom, if you're busy, if you've got businesses to handle, there's so many other things that you can be doing. And so it's time for us to integrate those habits or the things that we are doing with movement so that we can just get movement in throughout the day and not just at a select time when we decide to go to the gym. Okay, that's number 4. I'm not going to talk much more on that because I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Number 5, nutrition. Nutrition is tied to just about everything, y'all. 2 ways that having a healthy diet can help with lowering your chance of getting breast cancer is that eating foods that are dense in micronutrients. So I'm not talking about the fat, the protein, the carbohydrates. I'm talking about antioxidants. I'm talking about vitamins and minerals, things like that, is to eat fruits and vegetables, right? An antioxidant is a compound that helps fight off something called free radicals within your body. So free radicals are compounds in your body that are naturally created, honestly, when you do things like cellular respiration. When your body creates energy, things like free radicals are created. And we don't like free radicals because they cause DNA damage. And we talked about this many, many times. DNA damage can lead to cancer because it can lead to mutations that cause the cell to do whatever it wants to do, which can ultimately lead to cancer. Antioxidants they bind to free radicals and eliminate them. They get rid of them in the body. That is something that if you are getting antioxidants, you are lowering your risk of getting breast cancer or any type of cancer for that matter. Another thing that a good nutritious diet can do is it can help your immune system, right? There's a huge role that the immune system plays in cancer. Immune cells oftentimes will help to eliminate or help those cells go through apoptosis, cells that are no longer doing what they need to do. And so if you have a strong immune system, you are lowering your risk of getting breast cancer. I'm going to leave that there because what else is there to say? Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying here till the end. And if you are here till the end, I'm going to ask you to do one thing for me. Actually, 2. 1, I need you to rate and review on whatever platform that you are listening on because it helps my podcast get out there to more people. And 2, share this out with somebody you love because I'm sure somebody that you know that's not just yourself can gain some lessons from this podcast. All right, guys, I love you and I'll see you in the next one. That is all I have for you all today. Thank you so much for spending your time listening to me. I hope you join me in the next one to learn more about health topics that can help you improve your life so you can be happy in your dwelling place. Love y'all. Bye.